One thing you can say about running cruising courses is that it's never boring. I began my career as an instructor examiner long before GPS had been thought of. Training boats were smaller in those days, and I well remember competent crew bonanzas with 6 up on a Contessa 32. Sounds like a crush? It was, but it was luxury after day skipper weeks on a Seal 22. The crowding wasn't a dead loss though. The shortage of elbow room tutored all hands in the vital seaman's art of tolerating one's shipmates, for the length of a course at any rate. These days, boats are longer and wider. Instructors can lock their cabin doors at night to keep out the snoring and take a break from that infuriating student who knows so much you wonder why he came in the first place. Thus, progress marches ever onwards. Yachts are drier than they used to be as well. I loved the Contessas which I sailed for thousands of miles. In many ways they were better boats for the job than anything in use now, but they were shockingly wet when doing what they did best, which was powering up wind in a blow. They also suffered from condensation, with all those bodies on board. In winter, the fallout could be so bad that the pilot berth in the saloon of our training specials was colloquially known as the drip tray. It was with deep joy, therefore, that I tossed my duffel bag over the rail of a 34-foot steel sloop which had been offered to the RWA for a Yachtmaster Instructor Assessment course. She was roomier than most, and she had a cabin heater. To protect the guilty, we will call her the Softie. Softie's heating arrangements were far from ideal, but back in the 80s, when all attempts to mitigate the freezing fog in the forecastles of training yachts were dismissed as self-indulgent hedonism, anything was better than nothing. It's always been too much to expect sailing schools to equip their yachts with handy little coal or wood stoves for winter sessions, even though I've shipped these wonders of comfort on all my vessels, including the current production GRP cruiser. Warming my toes at their cheerful fires 24/24 on North Atlantic crossings has been a delight, for nothing keeps a boat so attractively habitable. Sadly, many people take a bourgeois attitude to this sort of organic living, with its demands for storing fuel and the inevitable dust. The next best thing is a modern blown air system, or for smaller craft at any rate, a bulkhead mounted charcoal heater. Like the coal stove, these profit from an external flue to whisk away the products of combustion, along with the damp air from inside the yacht. The result is toasty, bone-dry accommodation. Softie didn't benefit from any of these well-tried sources of warmth. Instead, she carried a pressurised paraffin heater working on the time-honoured principle perfected, optimists might say, by the Primus stove. This glory of ancient technology lived on the forward bulkhead of the main saloon. Its fuel tank was tucked away under a bunk, and a system of copper piping with far too many unions led to its burner. It exhausted via a slim flue pipe through the deckhead. Similar heaters are still on the market, and they seem to work well, but this example came with inbuilt issues. They resulted from a poor initial installation, followed by what can only have been a lifetime's lack of maintenance. By the time I came aboard, the beast had sunk into the category of national health hazard. When you've kicked around on training yachts for a few years, you can see how this would happen. Upkeep aboard the ones I sailed at the old National Sailing Centre was managed by means of what was called a defects book. As a week on board developed and things started to fall off, we did our seaman-like best to fix them as we went along. This was all good stuff for the students, but if a job proved sensible use of course time really didn't work, we sorted around the problem and entered it in the defects book. The book was handed to the centre's boatswain when we returned to base on Friday afternoons, and he and his merry men ripped into the problems over the weekend. I'm sure other schools operate parallel systems. In theory, it should proceed like clockwork. Sadly, as yachts grow older and more issues develop, a triage system comes into play. The boatswains don't call it that because they haven't been on the NHS course, but that's what it is. In the case of Softie, it's easy to imagine the scenario the previous Sunday afternoon towards knocking off time. The boatswains finish their afternoon mugs of tea and pick up the dog-eared defects book. "What's left on the list, mate?" "Well, we got diesel pouring from engine filter, starboard primary winch running backwards with all pawls toothless, and clue ring of number 2 Genoa working loose. Oh, hang on, there's also fuel leaking from cabin heater, which doesn't seem to work very well." OK, mate, you sort the winch, I'll deal with the diesel. If we've time, we'll get out the sail needles. If we haven't, they'll just have to manage with numbers 1 and 3 next week. The heater's not important. It can wait. Forget that till next week. This must have been going on for years. When my 4 instructor candidates and I picked up a mooring in a creek one February afternoon at the end of a passage that had not gone smoothly, we were chilly. We lit the heater to warm things up below decks, slid the hatch shut to help it along, then cuddled up to our tea in the cockpit and settled in for a heavy debrief. After 10 minutes, we became aware of a burning smell. I looked around for a distant bonfire, but it didn't take long to realise the source was a lot nearer home. We cracked open the accommodation to see what was going on down there, to be greeted by a cloud of black smoke. Opening up the whole companionway, it was obvious the heater had gone berserk. It was surrounded by licking flames and the bulkhead was just catching fire. In any normal circumstances, a good skipper would take charge now and do all the right things. But on a Yachtmaster Instructor Assessment course, an incident like this is a gift from the gods to the examiner in charge. I reckoned I could let the fire run for another minute or so before action had to be taken, which gave us an unparalleled opportunity. Right, boys, what do we do? One said, "Call the Coast Guard." The second said, "Grab the dry powder extinguisher from the cockpit locker and fight our way in." Number 3 came up with, "Wrap a wet towel round my head, get below and turn off the paraffin, then sort out the fire." The last looked around carefully before announcing, "I'm all for any of those, but if we lose the battle, we can run her up the beach over there and wade ashore." This exchange of views took only a few seconds. Once opinions had been offered, straight from the shoulder as it were, I invited numbers 2 and 3 to go down and do what they had sensibly suggested. Number 4 was appointed skipper in case their brave effort proved vain. Number 1 got a serious talking to and subsequently failed to come up to the standard required. As for poor old Softy, we did manage to extinguish the fire, although the bulkhead looked sorry for itself, but damage was largely cosmetic. The heater required the attention of a skilled fitter very soon, being it was the dead of winter and the temperature showed no signs of rising much above freezing. A number of further issues developed with the yacht before Friday, some of them significant, but when we filled in the defects book, the top of the page carried the entry, in capitals, "Sort the cabin heater, or you'll get a visit you won't enjoy from the popular front for cruising sailing instructors who are frozen stiff." To this day, I've wondered what exactly student number 1 imagined the Coast Guard in his remote office would be able to do for us before the yacht burnt to the waterline. The pragmatists won the day by looking out for themselves.